Well, hi there, everyone, and welcome to the next part of the Led by Love podcast series, which is taking a bit of a deeper dive into some of the key themes that we're exploring on our Sunday mornings. We've been thinking about, or trying to think about, what it means to be led by love rather than programs or structures. And it's really challenging. And we come to the theme today of being led by love to belong to what God is doing, to belong to his people, and that somehow belonging leads us to love, which is a huge area. So I'm really grateful today to have some friends bounce this round with me. We were just chatting before we got started about how we know each other. Ruth, I know because she heads up Renew Wellbeing, a charity that the Lord laid on her heart a number of years ago. I'm going to look at Ruth at this point.
Yeah, 7 years ago.
7 years ago, and is now spread out in different formats and different forms across the country, which is really exciting. So, Ruth, it's great to have you with us today. Dave, I know because we trained in college and university together, which will confuse some people because there's a very obvious age difference, I know, between the two of us. But Dave and I go back that far. Dave's been in pastoral ministry here in Wales and across the border as well. And now in Rudry, just up from Caerphilly, is setting up a retreat centre with a particular passion to care for carers and to pastor pastors. So Dave, it's great to have you with us today. And Bex, I know, because a lot of you will know, she's part of Bethel here, been involved in all kinds of leadership over the years, but with a special focus at the moment on the Caring MMT and small groups in particular. I was thinking, actually, as we were talking about how we know each other, Bex, you knew my grandmother before you knew me. So that's
I knew about you before I knew you. Yes.
That's always worrying.
It was all good.
So great that we can catch up together today. One of the things that we're going to do is bounce off a little bit of passage from Romans chapter 12. We're not going to read it here because it would take a while to do that, but if you're listening to this, it might be helpful to have that open. But there's a really key verse in verse 5. Paul says, "In Christ, we, though many, form one body." Now, it takes a while for us to get our heads around that, but then he goes even further than that and says, "And each member belongs to all the others," which is an incredible thought, isn't it? We often think about belonging to Jesus or Jesus somehow belonging to us. But Paul goes further than that and says, no, we actually belong to one another. And I was thinking about that and just the difference between going to church on a Sunday or attending somewhere or, subscribing on YouTube or participating in some way. That's sort of one level of belonging, but even just a glance at these words, we can see Paul is hinting at so much more. So I'd love to just to start there with what can help us to belong to each other and what can hinder. So I don't know who wants to kick off. Who's got some thoughts on
that? All got some thoughts. It's a strange thing, the body image, isn't it? Because I broke my foot 2 years ago, right? And I've still repercussions in my entire body from that 3 little tiny bones I broke. And it's made me reflect on how we belong to each other, because for me, if I didn't go at the speed of the most broken bit, if every bit didn't respond to the most broken bit, the rest of it also, I got a bad hip now and a bad knee because I didn't slow down. So I've been having quite a lot of thoughts about this whole body image, particularly in relation to how do we slow down for the people who don't want to keep up? How does the body honour the most broken bits? That's kind of where I'm at with my head anyway.
Yeah, I guess similarly for me, I work in the medical field, so the image of using a body and how everything's interrelated really chimes with me, because the more you look into how the body is connected, it's just incredibly amazing that if one tiny bit, like your big toe, is removed, you can't walk anymore. And so, like you say, with your broken foot, it does have compensatory effects in the whole of the rest of the body. And even somebody who might view themselves as being the big toe of the membership, shall we say, rather than, you know, someone who's standing up preaching or playing the music or in a more prominent role, how this image, I think, is very sensitive to those sorts of different levels of people's view of themselves sometimes, and their gifting.
Yeah. I guess the word that strikes me there is this sense of belonging to each of us, or belonging to all of us, to each other. And I think as I reflect back on my time in church ministry, that isn't necessarily the sort of sense I got from people in the way they've expressed their more often when people talk about belonging to me, they'll say, it is my church. And I don't get a sense that people are talking about, these are my people, or I'm part of these people. They're talking more about, it's an ownership rather than a belonging sense. And you've already sort of picked up this thing about the difference between belonging to church and going to church on a Sunday. And I remember in Cambridge quite a long time ago when we set up a youth club in the church in Swavesey, that I got more of a sense from some of the kids that came to youth club when I met them in school or in the village or around in Cambridge itself, and they would talk about their church, not in an ownership way, but in a belonging way that often many of the members didn't seem to express. Those people that came primarily on a Sunday. So that thing about belonging to each other, I think, opens all sorts of questions for me and places to go.
It is interesting, isn't it? Because I think there could be such a focus sometimes on getting the building right, or getting the services right, or getting the structure right, and none of us want to do that badly, but sometimes the focus on that can be so strong that this sort of gravitational pull towards thinking of church as a thing or a place or a program is really, really strong.
Yeah.
Interesting too, though, because we were when I set up Renew 37 here in Nottingham 7 years ago, which has then become this sort of national movement. It was with the little church I was leading then. We didn't have a building, so church was the people. And the sense of belonging was really strong. My experience of being a bit broken within that, though, even though I absolutely adore that church and went on to lead them full time, so this isn't a comment on them, it's a comment on in general, is even that sense of belonging can be a bit suffocating. So actually, this idea of the body is, you don't try and make the hand another hand. You know, you don't try and make a toe into another hand. You don't want everyone to just be like you. But there is this thing of that, oh, right, better pray for you because you're not quite like me, or, you know, that kind of idea that we need to belong in a certain way is totally turned on its head by Jesus, or by Paul saying this about the body, because actually there is no one certain way to belong to the body. As you said, Max, every single bit of the body looks different, functions. So I kind of love the body image, because there's a possibility for massive diversity within that. Quite often we're not quite ready for, because we're still in club mentality. Even if it's not about the building, it can be about how you belong to this group. And even if we think we're being super welcoming, it's actually driving people to the edges going, what the flip? They're going to hug me. I don't even know who they are. You know, that stuff. So, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say, I wonder what a church would look like where everybody is very similar, because it's easy to fit in if everyone's like you. But actually, that's not the model that we're looking at here, is it? It's you know, how to engage people who aren't like you for the benefit of the fellowship.
Yeah, but I think that sadly there are probably quite a lot of churches where that tends to be the default, and for a lot of people that maybe are moving to a new town, new job, takes them somewhere else, they'll look for a church that they feel comfortable, where the people are like me, you know, where I'll go in and, oh, those are the songs I sing, and when new people come, I can remember, I think it was when I was moving up from Cardiff to Cambridge, going in a sort of transition period, just wandering around a few churches before we left and going to one in Newport. And there was this sense that, you know, they were so excited that you come along, but then there was this process they wanted you to go through about what it meant to be part of that church, and you had to subscribe to this, and there are clearly some things we need to share in our theology and the things that we subscribe to, but it was almost like you've got to be like us, come in and become like us. And that worries me. I love the idea of a church that says to me, come in exactly as you are, very different to us, and help us to grow, help us to see something that we're missing. Come and be the foot that we haven't had for ages, or the arm, or whatever it is. Because that model that Paul gives us demonstrates the potential for growth, for development, for change. It's scary. It's scary if you're in the church because someone new and different comes in and maybe starts to rock the boat a little bit, I think.
It can be a bit of a two-way process, though, do you think? Because sometimes people come to church and they just want to just take all the time and say, I'm just going to receive what you give me. I'm not going to actually offer my gifts, my foot or my hand or whatever. And, you know, for whatever reason, some people sometimes struggle to offer their gifts, and then it's stifling that possibility of introducing new gifts to the church, which the hand we might be missing or whatever. So it's somehow about enabling new people to discover their gifts or offer the gifts that they know about in a way that they feel comfortable to do as well.
Yeah, and that speaks to our structures, because we're all mouth and no knees. It's just, you know, it's like we train people to do the upfront stuff. We praise the upfront stuff. We criticize the upfront stuff, but the upfront stuff, the be in the worship band, be on a rota, be in a that, rather than the just being. This is where Renew came out of, really, was my absolute sense of I can't belong anywhere at the moment because I'm just not well enough. I had my own breakdown and I just couldn't bear to be there, because you felt a bit useless, because we turned serving one another with our gifts into I don't know, some sort of like machine almost. You know, how's God going to use you? It's like, oh, well, I'm useless then if I can't bring, if the gift of who I am is my vulnerability and my brokenness, if the gift of who I am is to say, actually, you know, I'm one of the more, you know, you're going to cover me up. I'm one of those bits of the body. You're going to be around me. If that's the gift, and without those bits, to be honest, and without talking about them in too much detail, we would be a bit stuck, wouldn't we? So we need all the bits we need to give more honour to. Yeah. I that's a gift too, you see, and there's where, you know, I've been in a church for a while. I'll be careful how I talk about it because they're lovely, but the only way to really belong is to join a team and be on a rota for a Sunday, because that's where we think gifts lie. And there's so much happening in people's lives that it's the gifting of God to the church, which it isn't a thing we do or go to, it is who we are. That how do we spot the gift of the one who has no language and no movement and brings us ability to see what God's presence looks like in its raw form? Where does that belong in our busy church life? That
I think there's something Rebecca said about that space sometimes we need to give people when they might first come to church. They might come along, and belonging and being doesn't mean you've instantly got to get involved in everything. For a lot of people, perhaps people that have drifted away from church or who are searching spiritually for something, they don't really yet know what it is they want or what they're expecting to get. They're just looking for a refuge, for a place, for a people. And one of the things I think we need to do is give them the time and actually let them find out who they are. And linked to that, I think, is that thing about the gift. Just because somebody is an accountant doesn't mean they've got to be the church treasurer. Their profession is not necessarily the spiritual gift that God is drawing them into our church with. It may be something very different. And one of the challenges I think that there lies in there is I guess mostly for church leadership teams, is to recognize where you may already have somebody established in a role who's been doing it in the church for some time, but there's somebody else that comes in who's got a gift that you can see is just waiting to be developed, waiting to be opened up. But Fred has done the job for 40 years, and so no one's going to say, well, what if somebody else did it? And letting go of some of the things that we do sometimes, that's a really big thing in service, to let somebody else grow, to let somebody else discover how they belong. Yeah, I've encountered that a few times, I think.
It's a massive challenge, isn't it? Because I think everything we've been saying is right. When there are existing avenues for certain gifts, it's pretty easy for people to join the music group, the Sunday school team, the welcome team, tea and coffee. There's really obvious ways. But it strikes me as we're talking that's quite a lazy way, isn't it? Because, you know, people might be operating out of a gift that they've got, but their real passion, you know, the thing that keeps them up at night, the thing that they really dream about, there isn't currently a natural avenue for it, and so we don't ask them about that. We don't explore that at all. I loved what we were saying earlier about what it means to belong. I saw an article in I think it was the Baptist Together magazine time before last, that Craig Gardner, lecturer at the Baptist College, wrote about when we welcome new people into our fellowship. The challenge isn't to say, right, you've got to become like us. The reality is now you're a different fellowship because there are new people that are part of it. And he said, as part of that, almost conflict is a healthy and an inevitable part of it, because growth is always difficult. Change is never easy. And I like that idea that actually to grow, you're inviting new ideas, new perspectives. And some of that is going to bump up against each other, and that should be a sign of a healthy thing, not something that we try and squash or flatten out or defeat, but something that should be part of. But we don't tend to think like that.
Mm. And even in the way we're talking, we're still thinking of church as that thing we do on a Sunday. And there's something about the Renew Adventure has been so exciting for churches that have taken it on, because it gives them another space in which to just listen. What, like David was saying, you know, where are the spaces in which we get to know somebody really, really well? One of the things that was happening, I mean, these spaces were, I suppose, set up originally for people who were struggling with their mental health, but actually they've become a really good way for churches to re-engage post-pandemic. Really, they're sort of, let's sit ourselves down over a cup of tea, have a hobby going on, and the hobby itself speaks to a gift that we don't value those, because they're not about running a service on a Sunday. And some of the things that we've found, people, everybody is this amazing masterpiece of God's creation, and church isn't something we make happen. The Christ is the head of this body that is amazing. And getting to know what it is that person is and has doesn't fit into the boxes that already exist sometimes. And I suppose what we're doing at Renew is going, have a different space, have a wider, more open space. Just let people come, with or without faith, with or without agenda. And in that space, and in the place of prayer, gifting has space for it, you know, the branches to get out a bit. And that's a different image though, isn't it? That suddenly turn the body into a tree.
And our church has started since the pandemic, Crafty Chatters, which is just a bit of a space like you're talking about, where people come and might do knitting, they might do drawing, they might just learn from one another a skill like crocheting or something like that. But the conversations that are had over those activities are quite different than perhaps you'd have on a Sunday morning, where you're constrained by, you know, you've got to make the coffee, or you're on a rota to do the X, Y, and Z, and somebody asks you how you are, and oh, I'm fine. You know, you haven't got time to unpack. Actually, you've had a rubbish week, and actually you'd really value sitting down with someone and just talking about it. But we don't really have time for that on a Sunday. And so these extracurricular things, if you want to call them that, we have small groups which are part of the church program as such, but we meet in people's houses, and we have tea and coffee and biscuits, and we just you know, we have a time to talk to each other. We do study the Bible. We have socials. We have, so there's a smaller group of people that we can get to know in that way a bit better. And maybe people that I wouldn't normally talk to on a Sunday as well.
Mm. I think you're right in saying that often your time, or we've got to get the coffee made or whatever, can be a hindrance. But I've often wondered about the sort of the culture as well, that it's such a smiley, happy, noisy environment, that to actually say, I don't want to stand up and sing that this morning, or I don't know if my head's in that place today. It's actually a really brave thing to do, and it's hard because you don't want to throw it open every Sunday to say, so what went wrong this week, everyone? But you want that sort of culture where you can, like Paul talks about in this passage, rejoice with those who are rejoicing, in a way that also allows you to mourn with those who are mourning, so that the mourners and the rejoicers can somehow be part of the same thing. It's yeah.
And that's where we're discovering that doesn't mean they have to feel like they have to fit into one thing on a Sunday. So that means that being the body there's lots of different expressions of being the body. I mean, I'm not sporty, but I still have got a body. But you can still do a bit of sport. So there are different ways of being a body. You don't want to do the same thing with your body all the time, because it doesn't then allow different bits of your body to exercise themselves. So I think the idea that we have a certain way, we understand church in a certain way, means we don't get the breadth and the riches of people who aren't necessarily what we think we're looking for to make church happen. And they're people who you get, you always get your little nucleus of people who do everything, and they get slightly irritated at the people who just come and take. And then you've got the people who come and go, I don't know how to fit in. And you've got all that going on because we're thinking about it as a gathering, which, when I wasn't well, I couldn't walk through the doors. I mean, I couldn't be there. It was the pressure of everybody's interest was too much. So what we've created in our spaces that churches are running alongside their gatherings are these prayer spaces as well, a quiet space. You can come and be connected in silence. You actually don't need words to be connected. Some of the most profound moments of body connection happen in the silence of a prayer room. So it's having that variety across the life of the body that allows people to find a place to sort of belong, I think.
Yeah, and I think we really, really undervalue social interaction. We see it as it's not really serious church, just having a meal together or something. Just we don't really appreciate the reality of how it's the start of belonging. It's how you get to know the people. And I think about some of the seasons of church, and I think about Easter or harvest or Christmas, and some of the most successful elements of those weeks or whatever will be the gatherings, the Maundy Thursday meal or the harvest supper, and everybody talks about them and everybody really loves them, and when they're happening, you get a sense of people talking to somebody in your church that they've been in church with for maybe 10 or 20 years, but never really spoken to. When I was in training, in one of the churches in Newport, early on, I asked some of the morning service people very deliberately to come to the 6 o'clock service. And then I asked people who they knew and what they knew of each other. And I got some negative feedback from that experience as much as I got positive, but it was really sad to realize that people were part of a church for sometimes decades, but really didn't know what somebody did, where they lived, what their interests were, nothing about them. And if we're to be body working in harmony, well, how can you work in harmony if you're not aware of each other properly? And alongside that is also then we go on to this expansion of what is church. I can remember in Swavesey talking to them about how big do you think our church is, and people would put numbers on it by 60, 70 people. And I said, well, what if I said I count our church as being about 400 strong? And they all sat there and were just like, well, I said, well, what about the 120 children that come to our youth groups on a Friday? And the 100 children that 3 of us visit and work with in the school 3 times in the week, and the people in their offices and things, where we go and we continue to be church, not all together, not gathered for an hour where we're going to get our top up to get through the week, but actually being church. And again, it's hard to get people who have got a traditional concept of, I belong to church, I go to church on a Sunday morning, I've done my hour, I go home and I'll go to church next week. To carry on going and being church tomorrow and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, that's where it gets exciting, where people meet up in other places and they recognize that they are still being church wherever they are.
And you could argue, actually, we're part of a church that's got 2.5 billion people in it. So that's the being connected to the head. That's where I think also, as well as the social bit, what was missing for me was, because we were really connected. Like I'm talking about my experience back in the day was a church really well connected. We knew everything about each other, to the point that it became a little bit exclusive. You can only know that much about a certain amount of people. And the development of a habit of prayer together has led for us to know each other in a whole different way, because our connection to the head is what connects us to each other. And it means that people can feel connected who even can't come, or when during the pandemic, those churches that had already set up a rhythm of habit of prayer, shared prayer together, nothing messed with that. Nothing. We learned, didn't we, during the pandemic, or we should have done, what unites us and what doesn't. And actually, yes, the being together is how we learn about each other, but actually we are church. And that sort of that sense of hope there's loads of room within this body for you, and we are all connected by sinews and blood and prayer, I think is a wonderful thing. That even if you can't get to go, and for people who are struggling with their mental health, people who are housebound, there's something rather lovely about still feeling they can belong, even if they can't do it in the way we think they should.
I guess
sometimes.
Sorry. Go on, Rebecca.
I guess sometimes people may be scared of that sort of level of connection. No, I think, the Facebook age, where people have got 2,000 friends on Facebook and think that makes them connected to people. And actually being that step away and being able to portray what you want to portray of yourself on a platform like that is not being real. It's, you're putting your mask on and being who you think other people want you to be. And that's sort of fairly safe for some people. But to come into an environment where to really belong, you've got to actually have real friends and take that mask off and be really you and make yourself vulnerable. It's quite hard for people.
But alongside that, I think is something maybe, Ruth, you're giving an answer to, but the fear within. If you are part of a group that has become very established and knows each other very well, the idea that somebody new might come in is going to change that dynamic. And I think that is something we can unconsciously do in church. We like where we've got to. We like the structure. We like the shape of our services. And unconsciously, we just stay there. Someone else comes in, it all unsettles. They're now talking to that person that I would normally talk to now, or whatever it is. So there's that fear for both sides. And it's not a deliberate thing. It's that, how often is love squashed by fear? The love that reaches out to a homeless man on the street, but we don't because we're afraid of something, or the love that just is afraid to engage riskily, dangerously, because love is dangerous, isn't it? Really, when we really love and we allow ourselves to love and be loved, it means we're opening ourselves up. We're making ourselves hugely vulnerable, and it's fear often pulls us back. When you say to a church, "We're going to try something really new," you can almost sense half of them. Oh no! But it's a risk. Love's a risk. It's exciting.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about, I forget who said it, but it was quoted in a book a few years ago, that in any relationship, the person who loves the least has the most power because they're sort of invested in a different way. And I think we do love, but we love at a certain level that allows us to remain in sort of control or in sort of charge. And yet that, I mean, it fundamentally changes that notion of how we think about God, who loves the most and is willing to risk and willing to come and willing to sacrifice. And that is, the Bible tells us, that is what love is, isn't it? It is the laying down, it's the giving away. But we sort of settle for a pseudo love, don't we, which is far more comfortable and controllable.
Yeah. But here's another what am I invited like the fly in the ointment here?
Yes.
There is something about boundaries that is really important too. This wonderful self-giving love of Jesus, we've sort of translated in some churches, certainly in mine, and this is how I made myself ill, into I've got to just pour myself out on behalf of everybody else. I mean, I brought up in a lovely Christian household where Jesus wants me for a doormat could have been our theme song, and it was just this kind of lovely parents, still my lovely parents in case you're listening. But it was that almost like they don't exist as human beings because there are people to serve, and forgetting to be compassionate to yourself, forgetting you're also in the room. It's been huge as I've been working with churches, leaders who are absolutely weary to the point of brokenness, still pouring themselves out because that's how they've translated what Jesus did. And I'm not terribly convinced that's going to be a healthy way of living because we aren't Jesus, we're his body, and we are still part of the body, whatever place in the body we have. We also have the need to be tended to and cared for at times, and that sense of coming equally and just being together, connected to the head, which is Christ. It's interesting. I think the body gives us permission then sometimes to rest. That sense of actually the way in which I'll serve you best at the moment is to stop completely, and that was what I learned with my broken foot. Was if
I think something about getting nourishment as well. The body doesn't exist without being nourished, and it might be different for different people. That might just be stepping back from doing something. It might be going on a retreat. It might be reading a book and sharing that with other people. But having permission to take that step back and say, actually, I need something to nourish me so that I've got that energy to carry on giving out to other people.
And in truth, that is exactly what Jesus modeled, isn't it? Before every big thing that happened to him, we read how he went and he prayed, or he found quiet time, or he prepared himself, or he surrounded himself with people who served him, who he didn't just do. There were people that gave to him, and he was cared for in those moments. Sometimes that sort of got misunderstood, but he didn't just non-stop just go. And in ministry, it was what really led me to the whole sort of process behind Living Waters retreats, was just the more I spoke to friends and colleagues who were in ministry, and my own experience was just how overwhelmingly exhausting it can become. How difficult it is to explain that to your fellowship, to your church, that your minister and his family, who he just about remembers because he didn't see them very often, or she, or whoever it is, really needs a rest. Really, and it's not because they're having a breakdown or they've run out of things to say. They just deserve a bit of a rest. And in some churches, it's quite hard for a minister to say, I'm only doing 3 Sundays or less than that or whatever, because someone else is going to do it. It's almost like, well, we pay you to do this. You should do it every week. And again, I suppose it comes to that same thing where we were a little while ago. If we measure everything by what happens on a Sunday, and what we expect from that, we then also lift up those people that we expect to give us the teaching and the leading and the worship, all that stuff. So the pressure's on for them to do it, always there. always measured.
And you've got people whose gifting is very, you know, they're the hands and the feet. They're the ones that seem to have great capacity. And yeah, I was recently in a conversation with a friend I was sort of pointing out a minister who might well be struggling and needing a bit of, and he's going, well, I work 4 times as hard as him. Thinking, yeah, you do. You're a different bit of the body. That idea that we want everybody to have our capacity be the same as us. The body image is a glorious way to counter that, isn't it? Because we're not all the same, but we do all belong. So.
And the emotional responsibility that almost every person in church leadership takes on for other people is exhausting and draining. And if we don't allow people that place and space to refresh themselves, to maybe to go and find somebody to unburden that through them to God, then they will run out of capacity. They simply will run out of capacity.
And I think that's true not just to those in full-time paid ministry. You know, I remember a couple of years ago finding a book called Leading on Empty. It was really, really helpful. And the first line of it nearly
behind me, that Wayne Cordero. Yes.
It'll be there. That's the one. That's the one.
Yes.
The first line of it undid me. It just said, we don't forget that we're Christian. We forget that we're human.
Yeah.
And straight away, it was like, I mean, that was the whole book for me. I could have just, was worth the price of the book. And yet, having read that, still forget, still trying, running on all cylinders, etc. And that doesn't help, doesn't it? If we're not modeling our need for each other. I think it's in another passage where Paul is again describing the church like the body, and he gets so, you can feel his frustration, can't you? He's like, one part can't say to another, I don't need you. And yet we live like that, don't we? Like we've got it all. We don't need anyone else's gift, no one else's insight, no one else's time. And we don't forget that we're Christian. We just forget that we're human.
Yeah, I think in smaller churches, in big ones too, but in smaller churches, you often find this challenge of the number of people that are available to lead things, and on a Sunday that can be perhaps the biggest test. And often I find where you've got couples that are both engaged in youth work or running Sunday schools and things, and maybe they're both going out to Sunday school every week, or they alternate weeks or whatever. And then you just, over a while, you talk to them and you discover they haven't actually shared together, sitting in church, taking in some ministry together or worshipping together for years. And I can, again, try to sort of feed that into one of the churches I was in. And other people were like, but that means I've got to have my kids. Where are they going to go if we don't have Sunday school this week? So, but what if we do something very different and allow those people that serve you all the time to come in and get what you say you need, therefore they've got to go and do your children. But finding that balance, we tried cafe churches and all sorts of things that sort of fed into that. And I know some people really found them uncomfortable because of the idea of sitting at a table, and the structure was very fluid. But for some folks, it was so energizing and liberating. And go back to that thing about the safety of who you know and the rest of it. You can remember when we'd done it for about 3 months, and we had a church meeting to reflect on how it had gone. And the people that were critical of it were the ones that came in and sat on the same table in the back corner each week. Whenever we had it, they didn't engage with it. They just didn't like it. The ones that loved it were the ones that had ended up sat on a table with someone they'd never chatted to before, and suddenly started to learn something more about church.
Yeah, and I think it's that two-way thing, isn't it, of getting to know each other, but also that connection to the head. I remember years and years ago now, we took an evening to share our testimonies together, just to practice it. It was like, if the name Jesus doesn't escape our lips to each other, we haven't got a hope of sharing it with people outside the church. And somebody just sat there at the end saying how profoundly moving it was for them, because they'd never told anybody their testimony before. And this is somebody long-standing, like lifelong churchmanship kind of thing. And you think that's so sad that actually that thing that we do all share, is the one thing that we don't naturally seem to talk about. And that's number one, that's just weird. But number one, it's just really sad.
It was interesting when we first set up the first Renew space. We made a little rule: no proselytizing in the cafe style area. So it took a mental health professional who was an atheist to say to us, "Why aren't your people talking about their faith?" And I said, well, we're not proselytizing. And she went, it's not proselytizing to share your own story if somebody asks you, is it? And I said, no. She said, can't you just be normal? And I went, oh, no, we can't be normal. We've been on courses. We've done it. And she was like, she just couldn't understand why. If something's important to you, yes, of course, you listen to someone else's story. And what's happened in the course of having Renew spaces over time is people get normal about talking about, because we normalize prayer is on offer, the same as the jigsaw and the whatever. Actually, you go, oh yeah, it's something we do. This is what we do. Yeah, I can't help you with that, but I'll introduce you to a man who can. You know, that kind of sense of, let's just go, yeah, well, prayer really helps me. And you're not proselytizing if you're sharing your real story. It's just we've separated out our Christian-y bit from our being human bit. It's absolutely that. When I read that, I read that book and that sentence about being human at the right time as well in my life, and thought, I have completely forgotten how to be a human being, in which case I'm not hearing other human beings. And I've separated people out into Christian, not Christian, and actually God's view is very different, and the church is much vaster than we think, and it isn't just the people in our services on a Sunday. And that hearing that, where do we hear that? And yet with the presence of God is absolutely paramount, because he is the head. We have to have the head or the body doesn't work.
Yeah.
Where just after social, yeah. And just a social means it's like one hand clapping itself against the other. But if you know, having the head in the room helps, I think.
That thing about the being and doing, isn't it? That we jump into sort of doing the fixing of people or doing things, often then very much in our own strength and in our own thinking. Whereas if we just allow ourselves to be people in that belonging to God through Jesus, that's be who you are, be normal, be the person, and be prepared to say what you do. Not that you've got to do it because I do it, or let me do it for you or to you. Just be.
Amazing. Well, I think that's probably a good place to pause. I sense that we could talk about this all day. I think we got through one of the questions I sent around. That's really good.
There were questions. Oh yeah.
There was a whole A4 sheet, believe it or not. But yes, I think we got through one. So, but thank you ever so much, guys. It's been really helpful and really great to chat.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Nice to meet you too.